Hi there, how are you doing? Welcome to my channel, and please just call me Pesky or Pesk. As you can probably tell, this is my first video. Since I enjoy reading, and I know many people like to listen to stories being read, I said to myself, why not make a channel where you can share your love of books with others? Who knows what they might discover? And so here I am. Seeing as Halloween is just around the corner, I thought I would start with some stories about ghosts and hauntings. I've always been fascinated with the whole paranormal thing since I was a child, and I've actually scared myself out of sleeping on more than one occasion by reading books about it. Not so much anymore. The first book I'll be reading from is called Real Haunted Hospitals and Mental Asylums. And that is written by, who wrote this? Let's see, Zachery Knowles. I bought it on Kindle. I thought it looked interesting, so why not give it a shot? Hopefully it'll be a good read, but we'll see as we go along. So let's grab a cup of tea or your preferred beverage, settle down into a comfortable chair, and enjoy some literature. Okay, here we go. So the first one, I'm sure many people have heard of this place, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Let's see what this book has to say. In the early 1900s America, the country was ravaged by tuberculosis, a deadly and incurable disease. The bacterial infection causes painful growths in the lungs that make it increasingly difficult to breathe, resulting in a slow and difficult death. Called the White Plague, the highly contagious disease can overcome entire families and, in some cases, entire towns. Anything needed to be done to contain it, and fast. Fast forward to 1910, when Waverly Hills Sanatorium was established on a high hill in Jefferson County, Kentucky. A hospital for the treatment of TB patients, doctors and nurses did their best to keep it as self-sufficient as possible to limit the risk of infection spreading to the surrounding community. They maintained their own essential services, and hospital workers weren't allowed to transfer for fear of spreading the disease. As soon as Waverly Hills opens, it was overrun with sick patients. The hospital was rebuilt and expanded to meet demand, including the addition of a children's pavilion. This ward was designed to house children with TB, as well as the children of sick patients who had no one else to care for them. Diagnosis of TB often meant death. This was long before the days of antibiotics. Doctors were at a loss on how to treat the disease. Fresh air, rest, and proper nutrition were thought to be the best treatments, especially fresh air. It was so important that patients were often placed on open patios or in front of open windows, regardless of the weather. Fresh air was more important than staying out of the snow. As the illness progressed, more desperate measures were required. Exposing a patient's lungs to ultraviolet light in a so-called sunroom was one common treatment. An alternative method involved placing balloons into a patient's lungs and inflating them to encourage the lungs to breathe. Then there was the last resort, as doctors called it, surgically removing some ribs and the surrounding muscle tissue to ease the pressure on the lungs. Patients rarely survived it. For cases such as these, nurses had the death tunnel, a 500-foot chute used to lower dead bodies out of the hospital into the bottom of the hill. It wasn't just used for convenience. It helped protect the other patients' mental health. The sight of so many bodies leaving through the front door would have been devastating for patient morale. It was business as usual at Waverly Hills until it closed in 1961. New antibiotic treatments managed to do what UV exposure and removing body parts could not, and TB was almost completely eradicated. Unfortunately for the patients of Waverly Hills, many of them entered the hospital by the front door and left via the death tunnel. Keeping up with the disease left most records in disorder, so no one knows exactly how many people died within Waverly Hills walls. Speculators say 63,000, though historians opt for a more modest 8,212 deaths. After the TB hospital had closed, Waverly Hills was reopened as Woodhaven Geriatric Center. No one paid too much attention to what went on at the facility after that, but maybe they should have. In 1982, Woodhaven was closed by the state because of patient neglect. For 20 years, Waverly Hills lay vacant. Well, almost. Despite its disuse, crumbling walls, and increasingly decrepit state, the homeless flocked to Waverly Hills for a dry place to sleep. It also became a favorite haunt of vandals and partiers looking for a thrill. That's when the story started. The paranormal sightings at Waverly Hills began as whispers in the Jefferson County community. Mysterious doors slamming, lights on when there was no power to the building, the sounds of footsteps in empty rooms, disembodied voices. No one paid the ramblings of hoodlums and the homeless much mind, but the stories became so frequent they could no longer be ignored. They even piqued the interest of the Louisville Ghost Hunters Society, who came to investigate the hospital and bring its secrets into the light. Since then, the sanatorium has been dubbed one of the most haunted places in the world. Maybe that's because you don't even have to venture inside the building to spot something eerie. Countless people have seen the same desperate, spectral woman running at the front entrance of Waverly Hills. Witnesses saw her hands and legs bound in chains, blood dripping from her wrists and ankles. She screams desperately for someone to help her, then disappears into thin air. Could she have been one of the many victims of TB who died at the hospital? Or one of the tortured residents of the prison-like elderly home that followed? No one can say. One thing's for sure. The wailing woman isn't alone. The spectral appearances of countless children, likely young victims of TB, still roam the hospital. Many visitors have heard the sounds of children laughing and playing on the building's roof, even singing nursery rhymes like Ring Around the Rosie. When visitors investigated the strange sounds, no one was to be found. It makes sense that the spirits of children might linger on the roof. They were often taken up there for heliotherapy, where doctors expose them to the sun and fresh air in hopes of alleviating TB symptoms. More sinister children can be found deeper in the building. On the third floor, the ghost of a little girl has been seen so many times that visitors have given her a name: Mary. Mary appears in different ways to different people, maybe depending on her mood. Sometimes visitors find her harmlessly, though eerily, playing in the hall with a ball. Sometimes she's just lurking and watching. The account of one terrified visitor shows a different side of Mary. The person found a more disturbing Mary in one of the rooms on the third floor and claimed after that Mary wasn't normal. The little girl appeared to have no eyes, just black gaping sockets, where they once were. Witnesses report that the visitor ran screaming from the building and refused to return. Many believe her story, since other witnesses have also reported seeing the same girl peering down at them from windows on the third floor. Mary's not the only little one roaming Waverly Hill's upper levels. Just one floor up lurks the ghost of Timmy. He's been seen and discussed so much over the years that it's hard to parcel out fact from fiction, but legend has it that he was 7 years old when he died at Waverly from TB, and he's been there ever since. Like Mary, Timmy has also been seen playing with a ball in the hallways, but has become more famous for it since it's the only thing he ever seems to want to do. Visitors often bring balls with them to the fourth floor in an attempt to communicate with him. Sometimes the ball seems to move on its own accord. Other times you can hear a ball bouncing and the sound of a boy's laughter. Several photos taken on the fourth floor have appeared on the internet showing the eerie face of a young boy peering around the corner. Dying at such a young age, Timmy will forever be a child. One who just wants to play, even if he can't manage to depart the hospital where he languished and passed away. A few ghostly children might seem harmless enough, but the fifth floor never fails to horrify. The floor looks normal enough, with a couple of nurses' stations and patient rooms. Legend has it that the fifth floor is where the doctors house the TB patients who had gone mad from their suffering, though no one can say for sure. Reports of strange shapes, disembodied voices, and unexplained sounds are more common on this floor than any other. Hands down, the most mysterious and ghostly part of the floor, possibly even the building, is room 502. Even just approaching it, visitors often feel incredibly uncomfortable, overwhelmed with a sense of despair. That would make sense, considering the sad history the room holds. Legend has it that in 1928, a nurse was found in the room hung by the neck from a light fixture. Suicide. The woman had become pregnant out of wedlock by one of the doctors or superintendents of the hospital, no one knows which. Depression overtook her, and rather than admit the shame of being pregnant and not married, she took her own life and that of her unborn child. But that wasn't the end of the despair for room 502. In 1932, another nurse jumped out of the window, plunging to her death. Unlike the previous woman, no one knows why this nurse would have taken her own life. People at the time have speculated that she may have been pushed out. No one was ever able to solve the mystery. It would seem that one or both of the nurses who lost their lives in room 502 still linger today. Some have witnessed the complete apparition of a woman in white lingering in the doorway of room 502. Others have seen strange shadows and heard whispers. One thing's for sure, room 502 is not a welcoming place. Often, the door closes on its own accord. Many have heard a clear and firm voice saying, "Get out." Visitors can't help but wonder if that's what the nurse heard before she was pushed out the window. Nowadays, it's not possible to wander through Waverly Hills on your own. You have to go on a guided tour. With Waverly's long history of disease, suffering, patient neglect, and untimely deaths, the residents never stop trying to make their story heard by those who listen closely enough. Recently, the hospital was purchased by a private couple who planned to convert it into a 4-star hotel for ghost lovers and thrill seekers. Now the big question is, will the nurses allow anyone staying in room 502 to last the night? Who knows? So that is Waverly Hills. I'm not sure how many there are. Let me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like 14. 14 different stories of hospitals or asylums are included in the book. Okay, that's not too bad. We can do, let me see how long the next one is. Okay, we can do the next one. It's not that long. Taunton State Hospital. In 1854, Massachusetts Taunton State Hospital opened. Commissioned by the government because of overcrowding in the state's existing mental hospitals, the new building was coined the State Lunatic Hospital at Taunton. The hospital was impressively massive, designed to separate patients based on sex and severity of illness. It was built on a hilltop to give patients access to the only real treatments for insanity at the time: fresh air and quiet scenery. Within the first 8 weeks of opening, Taunton received 250 patients. By 1873, more than 500 people lived there. The demand for places to house the insane grew greater, and soon, Taunton was expanded to include group homes, crisis centers, sick wards, and juvenile housing. Young delinquents with a history of violent behavior or mental health issues were sent to Taunton by the state. Often, patients who were committed and subject to treatment were not actually mentally ill. Taunton, in particular, became known by historians as a place to lock up troublesome immigrants, especially the Irish. Most who came to Taunton never left. Soon, it resembled a self-contained city. As such, a large and well-equipped facility, Taunton was home to many high-profile patients. Probably the sickest among them was Jane Toppin, nicknamed Jolly Jane. A former nurse, Jolly Jane was also a confessed serial killer. One of her favorite pastimes was administering lethal doses of drugs to her helpless patients and lying next to them while they slowly drifted into death. 31 people lost their lives at Jolly Jane's hand, at least that she admitted to. When put on trial, she managed to convince the jury that she was insane, sending her to Taunton for the rest of her life. She was once said to have admitted that her life's desire was to kill more people, specifically helpless people, than any man or woman who ever lived. On the surface, the lunatic hospital's deranged patients might seem like the most frightening thing about the place, but the nocturnal activities of the staff are what really gave Taunton its horrific reputation. Standard practice at many mental hospitals of the time was to try experimental treatments including water and shock therapy. Water therapy involved placing patients in scalding and freezing baths of water to see what effect it had on the body. How this was supposed to improve the sanity of the patients, no one really knows. While you can't blame doctors for using what they thought were the best practices of the day, heavy and persistent rumors circulated about the extracurricular activities of workers at Taunton. Some say that hospital workers would take the most incapacitated patients down to the basement to perform cult rituals that involve torture and even sacrifices to Satan. For some doctors, Taunton may have been an opportunity to perform experiments that wouldn't have been possible elsewhere. Rumors fly that patients' limbs were removed and reattached to other patients to see how well the body reacted. Usually, these experiments resulted in death. Yeah, go figure. It all may sound a little far-fetched, but the mysterious satanic symbols found throughout the basement of the hospital can't be explained any other way. Even more convincing is the legacy the basement has held ever since those dark days. Many staff without knowledge of the basement's dark past reported feelings of discomfort and despair whenever they entered it, as well as unexplained cold spots that seemed to follow them through the room. Even many hardened criminals, residents at Taunton who were already accustomed to dank rooms and dark cells, refused to enter the basement to do chores, often losing privileges because of it. Whatever punishments they were threatened with were not enough to convince them to spend more than a few minutes in the hellish basement. One staff member couldn't blame them. He only made it to the bottom step of the stairs before he felt forced to stop. He closed his eyes and saw flashes of what he believed were the horrific events that transpired there over the years. He quit his job, left the hospital, and never came back. To this day, he can't bear to explain what he saw. Almost as well known as the infamous basement at Taunton are the surrounding woods. Legend has it that many members of the town, not just the hospital staff, performed bizarre cult rituals there. Back in the day, people reported hearing moaning, screaming, and loud bangs coming from the Taunton woods. The really strange thing is that people today still hear them. Some say the sounds are all that remain of the tortured souls who were brutally sacrificed there. Parts of Taunton were still in use until recent years, and one patient in particular had a very frightening experience in the woods. Hoping for freedom, he escaped the main facility and disappeared into a cemetery located in the woods. Deciding to lay low and hash out a plan to escape the area unseen, the man spent the night in the cemetery. In the dark that night, he felt cold hands touch his shoulder and realized that he had been caught. But when he raised his arms and turned around, he saw no captor. Instead, an almost indiscernible voice whispered in his ear, "Leave." So that's what he did. Breathlessly, he headed back to Taunton Hospital and turned himself in. The basement and woods are the most unsettling parts of Taunton, full of tortured lost souls. It would seem, however, that the lingering spirits haunt beyond those areas. A large number of patients reported seeing the apparition of a man lurking in their rooms in the main building. Sometimes he appears as no more than a shadow, but somehow manages to crawl across the wall. Other times he's nearly solid but looks freakishly tall, as if stretched out. However, there are a few things about his appearance that are always consistent. He's male, always appears in the corner of the room, and no patient has ever been able to see his face. Other strange occurrences in the hospital are less apparent, though no less unsettling. A large number of staff members working in the Goss building claim to have seen a man wearing white wandering the halls of the third floor. Others claimed that the lights in their room would turn on or off on their own, or complain of strange, unexplained noises from vacant areas of the hospital. While the main ward of Taunton State Hospital was shut down in 1975, the hospital remained in use in some capacity until an unexplained fire partially burned it down in 2008. Its long-term use made ghostly sightings a regular problem, frightening residents and workers alike. Despite efforts in Massachusetts to repair and restore the building after the fire, it was demolished in 2009. One would hope this was enough to put some of the tortured souls of Taunton to rest. But then again, the stories coming from the woods and cemetery continue. Okay. So that's two of the stories that we have here in this book. It doesn't seem so bad. It actually seems pretty interesting. So I think we'll continue reading it. Not today, but maybe in the next video. Probably in the next video. We'll just say in the next video that we will continue reading it. So I think there's like another 9 stories left, so that's not too bad. But yeah, interesting so far. I've heard of Waverly Hills before this. You see it on those ghost hunter shows, and it's always been fascinating. And you see pictures, you can look it up online, you can see it on YouTube of the shadows and the children, and the ball, and all of that. Taunton, I had never heard of before. Maybe I'll look more into it. We'll see. It seems to have an interesting history of its own. But that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to the stories that have been read in here. And I hope that you will come back. Leave a comment if you want. I always like to hear feedback. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, if there could be any improvements made. My audio, unfortunately, I can't make any improvements on that yet. Right now, I'm just working with a headset with a pretty good mic on it. Might change in the future. I don't know. We'll see. Depends on how things go. But I will definitely be continuing with the recording because I do enjoy reading. And again, I hope you enjoyed listening to this portion of our story time. I don't have a regular schedule for publishing videos, but I'm hoping it will be at least a couple of times a week. Maybe I'll be able to put out a regular schedule for posting videos. We'll just have to see. I do have a life outside of this. Yeah, work, family, all of that fun stuff. If you have any book recommendations of anything you'd like to hear, I'm always open to that. Maybe I might find something I've never read before. That is very possible. But yeah, if there's anything that you want to hear, list it in the comments below, and we might hear that. So have a great rest of your evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time of the day it is for you. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.